The silence in the grand dining room was so heavy that no one dared to breathe. Every smile around me suddenly felt false. Especially the one on my husband's face. The same man I had trusted with all my heart. But tonight he couldn't even look me in the eyes. And my mother-in-law, radiant as the perfect hostess, watched me like I was prey, not family. I didn't understand why until I overheard two guests talking about some papers I was supposed to sign. Papers that would quietly transfer my entire inheritance into their hands. In that second I realized this dinner was never about love. It was a trap. A carefully planned betrayal by the people I once called mine. And the worst part was that my husband knew. He was part of it, smiling while they prepared to take everything from me. But what they didn't know was that I had already discovered his infidelity. Tonight I wasn't just going to escape. I was going to make them regret ever underestimating me. Because this time I would not be the victim. I would be the storm they never saw coming. I always believed family meant safety. Especially after marrying into what seemed like the perfect wealthy home. But over time small cracks began to appear. My husband started coming home late with excuses that never matched. His phone was always locked. His smile faded every time I asked simple questions. And my mother-in-law acted overly sweet in a way that felt forced. As if she were hiding something behind every kind word. I kept ignoring it because I didn't want to believe the truth. Until one night I accidentally saw a message from another woman on his phone. My heart broke in silence as I realized I was living with an unfaithful husband. Who thought I would never find out. But instead of confronting him, I stayed quiet and observed. Because something deeper felt wrong. It was as if this betrayal was bigger than a simple affair. Then came the invitation to the grand Three Kings Day dinner. Where everything suddenly felt too perfect. Too carefully planned. Deep down I knew this was not just a family gathering. It was the beginning of something dangerous meant to destroy me completely. I tried to act normal after accepting that my husband was cheating. But every small detail around me began to feel like part of a larger secret. The more I watched, the more I realized this was not only romantic betrayal. It was something colder and far more dangerous. My mother-in-law suddenly started getting involved in my personal affairs. Asking about my inheritance. The property left by my late father. Even casually suggesting I should secure my future by signing certain documents. She always said it with a smile that never reached her eyes. While my husband stood silently beside her. Avoiding my gaze like a guilty stranger. That silence spoke louder than any confession. So instead of reacting, I decided to play along. I pretended to trust them while quietly gathering every piece of the truth. Checking his phone when I could. Noticing the same woman's name appearing again and again. One night I followed him with trembling hands. And watched him meet her in a quiet cafe. They sat together laughing as if I had never existed. In that moment my heart didn't just break. It turned cold. I understood that love was no longer my weakness. The truth had become my weapon. And I needed to know everything before I acted. Then the day of the King's Day dinner arrived. From the moment I stepped into that house I felt it. The hidden tension behind the luxury. The way guests whispered as I passed. The way two unfamiliar men stood near the entrance like guards rather than visitors. And the way my mother-in-law greeted me with an embrace that felt more like control than affection. She told me tonight was special and that important decisions would finally be made. Those words echoed in my mind as I sat at the long dining table. Surrounded by people who smiled at me but no longer felt like family. While my husband barely spoke. Only reacting when his mother looked at him. As if he were following instructions instead of acting freely. Little by little the pieces began to fit together. The documents she had mentioned. The sudden gathering. The presence of those men. And the deception. Everything pointed to something planned. Something that required my presence and my signature. As the dinner continued, I noticed a folder placed discreetly near my seat. Its edge barely visible under a decorative cloth. When no one was looking, I moved it just enough to see my name printed clearly. My full legal name. And beneath it the words that tightened my chest. Property transfer. In that exact moment I understood this was never about mending family bonds. It was about taking everything I had. Using trust as a tool and betrayal as a weapon. The worst part was that my husband was not a victim. He was part of the plan. Sitting right there while they prepared to strip me of my rights and leave me with nothing. Just when I thought I couldn't feel more alone. A waiter passed behind me and whispered those chilling words. Telling me to escape. That warning confirmed everything. Because strangers don't take risks unless something is truly wrong. Suddenly every second became critical. Every smile around me looked like a mask hiding greed. I realized that if I made one wrong move, I could lose not only my inheritance but also my freedom. While sitting there pretending to eat, with my mind racing, I made a silent decision. I would not confront them there. I would not give them the reaction they expected. Because tonight was not the end of my story. It was the moment I stopped being their victim. And began to become the one who would expose them all. No matter how deep their betrayal or how carefully they had planned it. They thought they had trapped me. But they had no idea I was already planning my escape. And something far more powerful than simply running away. I was preparing for justice that would destroy their perfect image forever. I kept my expression calm. Even as my heart pounded. Pretending to be the same quiet woman they thought they could control. But inside I was calculating every second, every exit, every face in that room. Because now I knew this was not only about stealing my inheritance. It was about trapping me into signing willingly. So they could walk away clean while I was left with nothing. I refused to give them that satisfaction. So I gently pushed my chair back. Smiled politely and said I needed a moment. My voice was steady enough not to raise suspicion. When I stood up, I felt my mother-in-law's eyes following me like a shadow. Sharp and watchful. While my husband finally looked at me. Not with concern but with silent tension. As if he feared I already knew everything. That fear gave me strength. Because it meant I was no longer powerless. I walked toward the hallway without hurrying. Controlling my pace until I reached the corner. Then I moved faster. My breathing quickened as I remembered the waiter's warning. Just as I turned toward the bathroom, I heard footsteps behind me, slow but deliberate. I instantly changed direction, choosing instinct over appearance, and continued straight down the service hallway where the lights were dim. And the noise of the party faded into a distant echo. Suddenly the waiter appeared again, his face tense, whispering that they were preparing the papers and that once I signed them, they would legally isolate me, making it impossible to challenge anything later. Hearing that confirmed my worst fear. That this had not only been planned by my mother-in-law, but carefully supported by my husband. The man who had already betrayed me once. And was now willing to betray me completely. For a moment the anger burned so strongly inside me that I wanted to run back and expose everything in front of everyone. But I stopped, because I knew emotions would only ruin my chance. I needed real proof, proof that would destroy them, not just words they could deny. So I asked the waiter in a low voice why he was helping me. He hesitated before saying he had seen this happen before. Another woman, the same method. That sentence hit me harder than anything. Because it meant I was not the first. I was simply the next target in a calculated pattern of betrayal. Suddenly this became bigger than me, bigger than my pain. It became something that had to end, not just something to escape from. As voices echoed from the main hall calling my name, I realized time was running out. Instead of leaving immediately, I made a decision that even surprised me. I would go back, but not as a victim. I would return prepared. I quickly took out my phone, activated the recording, and adjusted it discreetly, knowing that whatever happened next could become the evidence I needed. With a deep breath I walked back into the dining room. My face serene, my mind clear. When I returned, everyone looked at me with mild curiosity. Except my mother-in-law, whose eyes narrowed slightly as if she sensed something had changed. My husband forced an empty smile. As I sat down again, I noticed the folder now placed directly in front of me. No longer hidden, as if they were ready for the final step. My mother-in-law spoke softly but firmly, saying it was time to secure the family's future. She slid the papers toward me while the others at the table watched with unnatural interest. Their silence heavy with expectation. As I looked at the document, a strange calm came over me. Because I finally understood the whole truth. This was never just about money. It was about control, about making sure I had no escape once they took everything. Just as I was about to respond, my husband leaned closer and whispered that this was for the best and that I should trust him. Hearing those words from a man who had already betrayed me felt like the final confirmation I needed. In that moment, something inside me changed completely. The fear disappeared, replaced by cold clarity. I realized I was no longer reacting to their plan. I was about to destroy it from within. As I slowly lifted the pen, pretending to agree, I knew the next few seconds would decide everything. Not only for me but for everyone sitting at that table who believed they had already won. I held the pen over the paper long enough to make them believe I was about to give in. Letting the silence stretch so all eyes remained fixed on me. Then I lowered it slowly. Not to sign, but to pause as if I needed clarity. In that brief instant I looked up and asked a simple question about a clause I already understood. Forcing my mother-in-law to explain it out loud. While she spoke, I observed the room carefully. Noting how the two silent men moved slightly closer. How my husband avoided my gaze again. And how the guests leaned in with hidden expectation. That was exactly what I needed. Because my phone was recording everything. Every word, every lie, every detail of their plan unfolding in real time. When she finished speaking, I nodded gently, pretending to accept her explanation. But instead of signing, I set the pen down and said I had one more concern. Something personal I wanted my husband to answer directly. The attention shifted instantly. Because this was not part of their script. But they had no choice but to play along. I turned to him and asked if there was anything else he wanted to tell me before I signed anything. Something I deserved to know as his wife. For a second his face froze, caught between fear and calculation. Then he forced a smile and said there was nothing, that everything was for our future. Hearing that lie spoken so calmly in front of everyone gave me the final push I needed. I leaned in and quietly said the name of the woman he had been secretly seeing. The effect was immediate. His expression shattered, he lost his composure. And the entire table fell into stunned silence as whispers began to spread. Before he could recover, I spoke louder. Asking if he wanted to explain why he had been planning a new life with another person while helping his mother take everything from me. Suddenly the perfect image they had built began to crack. My mother-in-law tried to interrupt, her voice sharp with anger, telling me to stop creating drama. But I didn't stop, because this was no longer their stage. It was mine. With calm I picked up the folder and read the key lines that clearly showed the transfer of my inheritance. Making sure every guest understood exactly what they were trying to do. As I spoke I could see their confidence crumbling. The carefully controlled atmosphere turned into chaos. Then came the twist they never expected. I revealed that I had already consulted a lawyer days earlier. After suspecting something was wrong. And that any document signed under manipulation or hidden intent would be legally invalid. More importantly, I had already secured my assets in a way they could not access. Making their entire plan useless. That truth hit them harder than any accusation. My husband was speechless while my mother-in-law's face turned pale. Just when they thought it couldn't get worse. I placed my phone on the table and told them everything had been recorded. Their words, their pressure, their attempt to control me. Now everyone in that room knew exactly who they were behind their polished masks. The power they thought they had over me had vanished. Replaced by something much stronger, the truth. As the guests began to distance themselves, murmuring in disbelief, I stood up slowly. I was no longer the woman who had entered that house earlier. I was someone they now knew they had completely underestimated. For the first time that night I saw real fear in their eyes. Because they realized their plan had not only failed but had exposed them in front of everyone. As I looked at my husband one last time, I understood that the betrayal was over. What remained now was justice. And I was no longer running from them. I was walking away on my own terms. Leaving them to face the consequences created by their own greed and lies. I left that house without looking back.